Hey everyone, Sergio here. Just a quick note, if you're watching this Uncommon Pod as a YouTube podcast, just wanted to give you a heads up that we did have some rendering issues with some of the screens. So not everyone's faces are visible at all times, unfortunately, but the speaker is visible as well as at least a couple other members of the pod each time. So just wanted to give a heads up. We will get these issues worked out in the future, but still a fascinating conversation, and I hope you enjoy it as much as we did. Welcome, everyone. I am Sergio Santamaria, super excited to be recording the first People Uncommon Pod. Have joined five amazing people here, and I'm really excited to start this initiative. I think the way that the conversation will go is each of us will give a brief introduction on the four pillars of the facets that we like to learn about here at People in our Uncommon Pods. The first is our demographics and cultural background. The next is our education. After that, our professions. And finally, our skills, interests, hobbies, things that kind of define us in our personal time. So after those introductions, it'll really just become a place to learn from each other, ask each other questions, stimulate and interest each other intellectually, and see where the conversation goes from there. But the whole point of this is that we've rounded up five very unique and interesting and different people. And we expect that we will have something to bring to the table that others will learn from us, but also that we will learn from others here. So without further ado, we will get into introductions and then get into our first ever Uncommon Pod.
Hi everyone, I'm Cara. I am originally from Germany. However, my growing up has always kind of been all over the place. So I was born in Paris. My parents were there for the first 2 years. And then we moved back to Germany. Spent about 3 years living in Germany, which is where the whole extended family is, before coming to the US. And we moved to the US when I was 5, right outside of DC. Spent most of my growing up life there. And then right before senior year, found out we were moving to Austria. So we moved to Vienna, spent a year there, and then came back to the US for college. I went to the University of Michigan. I studied math and psychology. I got a teaching degree, which is what I do now. So I'm a high school math teacher. And after college, I was kind of torn between where to go, whether I wanted to go back to Europe or stay in the US. So I took a year off and I decided I'm not going anywhere. And I went to Asia, spent some time there, traveled around, did some random side jobs, worked on a llama farm, spent some time in Colombia as well. And so, and then I landed in Denver, Colorado, which is where I am now. I've been teaching high school out in Aurora for the last 7 years. It's a school that I absolutely love, with students from all over the world. So that's something that's kind of really important to me. And a profession I absolutely love, but it also gives me a good balance of getting to do things I love outside of school, which is, sports. I'm very anything sports I love to play. So I do a lot of volleyball at the moment. Growing up, it was soccer and basketball. I love to ski, hike, a lot of the classic Colorado activities, go camping. I'm aggressively extroverted, so anytime I'm not doing those things, I'm hanging out with friends. Occasionally trying to find that creative side, but that has always kind of been put on the back burner. That's pretty much it.
Hi, I'm Hanaa. I was born in the States, and I only stayed there for 2 months, in Michigan actually. And I was raised in Lebanon, and I lived there until 2022. I moved to the States. I lived in Nashville and Charlotte for a year and a half. And I recently moved to New York in January of this year. And it's been the most exciting thing, honestly, moving here and just starting a new life in a different continent and everything. And I work in landscape architecture here. So I design outdoor spaces and rooftops and terraces and stuff. I pretty much if I'm not in the design field, I'm mostly like interested in arts also. So I used to work in curation and just like painting and drawing back in Lebanon. So now whenever I can, I try to at least be involved or like see shows and see like artworks and stuff. I've been more focused on movement, not just like painting or something static, but I'm interested in more like dynamic forms of art, like dance or contemporary dance, intuitive movement, stuff like that. I also started climbing in Charlotte, so like almost 2 years ago now. So that's been a big part of my like active life and social life. I feel like it's a really good way to meet people when you move to a new city and different places.
Okay, I think you thought this was going to be an uncommon pod, and we all have like more things in common than we thought. Okay, so I am Minli. I am from the Dominican Republic. After a weird experience, I ended up renewing my passport back in December. A traumatic experience, and I ended up traveling to Colombia 4 times this year. And then I said, you know what, you shouldn't just go to Colombia. So I ended up going to Peru and Bolivia, like in a 13-day trip. I went to school for architecture and interior design. I never did anything with that. And then I ended up in social media. And that's how I ended up probably meeting everybody that I know right now and how my trips came to be. And now that I came from my trip, I was like, I want to do a lot of different things at the same time. And I wanted to like start moving in a direction more towards my goals rather than just being like super static. And that's how I ended up, talking to Sergio and coming to the Uncommon Pod today. I am also very interested in dancing. It's kind of one of the things that I rediscovered from myself in Medellin by staring at other people dance. And I've been trying to pick it up, but unfortunately there's not as many dance classes here in DR, so I've decided that I'm going to move to Medellin like in 6 months. Now I am in the process of figuring out not figuring out, I know what I'm going to do. I just told my parents like a while ago. I was having a conversation with my dad just now that I'm moving to Medellin. And just to make it like a little summary, in DR we're very traditional. We are not, they are, I'm not. And it's very difficult, even though I'm almost 40, to tell your parents that you're moving countries. So I am normally fighting with like basically going against the current here. And that's the place where I am at right now in my life.
Fascinating. Justin?
Hi, everybody. I am Justin Anwani. I was born in Detroit. I spent a lot of my childhood split between Detroit and Birmingham, Alabama. My dad is from Nigeria and came to the States when he was in his early 20s and is still in Detroit. And my mom and my great-grandparents came to Detroit from the South and came up. And so on my mom's side, from Michigan as well, but spent a lot of my childhood down south in Alabama. Ended up going to school in Houston where I met Sergio. And then moved back to Michigan after high school and after college, and have been doing organizing work. Was in law school up until a couple of months ago, graduated, and so back in Michigan, go blue as well. More as a fan, more than as an alum, but glad to be back in Michigan. What else? Big sports fan, love pickup, although I feel like I am getting older to the point that I keep on spraining my ankle every time I play pickup, which is tough to realize that you're getting too old to play pickup. So yeah, love sports, love basketball, football, watching Olympics is fun, World Cup is really fun, and yeah, just getting re-rooted back in hometown, and I've really enjoyed it. I think sports has been a really good way to connect with people and just enjoy time outside of work.
I will give my intro. My name is Sergio. I am originally Colombian, and it is probably the biggest part of my identity and my kind of cultural and ethnic background. Both parents are from Colombia, born and raised there. I myself was born in Ecuador, moved to the States when I was very young, though. went to school in Houston as well and studied data science and sport management, which is a good segue into what I've done with my career so far. I have worked in sports analytics. So if you are familiar with the movie Moneyball, you will know what I have done so far in my career. Lots of data analysis as it relates to sports performance, actually the stats and what happens on the field of play. However, as of this year, I have started to kind of transition away and obviously into people. Um, as I've dedicated myself to this over the last several months and really want to build a service and a place where we can all kind of socialize and invest in our friendships and all of our relationships a little more organically. Um, Interests and skills and hobbies, I honestly think the number one topic in that realm for me is travel. I am absolutely obsessed with seeing the world in any way I can, constantly looking for new countries to visit, new cultures to explore, new things to do. And besides that, spend a lot of my time playing sports. Active. I live in Colorado as well, and one of the big reasons for moving here was the skiing and the hiking and the camping and all of the things that you can do outdoors here. So that is my introduction, and honestly, I think the way that the rest of this conversation will go is poking into the things that each of us shared in our introductions and seeing what comes from that. So, if there are any outstanding or specific topics that people wanted to double click on from things that another pod member said, please go, and if not, I can lead.
I think Inley had a question. You mentioned like kind of the traditions and just that like not clash there, but the difference
DR?
there. Yeah, in DR.
Yeah, I can tell you. Actually, one of the things that I've been experiencing in my trips, it's like the realization that most people don't know anything about DR and we know everything about the rest of the world because we are so tiny. So, for example, I was in my trip now in Peru and I met an Argentinian guy. He's like, "Where is that?" And then a guy from Bumble kept saying Costa Rica, and I was like, "It's DR."
Yikes.
So it's like we are so tiny that the world doesn't know anything about us, but somehow Dominicans have such a pride about being Dominican. I know everybody's very nationalist with their own country, but I don't think I can explain how nationalist people are here. Regardless if the country is not the best, they are not aware. Our passport is probably one of the worst passports in the world. So we can only go to 30 places without a visa. And we don't get to experience the world as a lot of other people get to because they are in a different country and they have access to a different passport that allows them to. Also, something that happens here is that, for example, because our economy and the salaries are so low, most people stay with their parents until they get married and they get with a partner. So most people don't get to experience or live by themselves. It's even like not well seen if you live by yourself. Like, for example, a man doesn't know what to do with a woman like me because I have a job that pays me to work from home and I have freedom of schedule. So it's like, wait, what? I'm going to be at the office and you're going to be around? And people tend to be very classist, very colorist. I guess for us it's colorism because it's not racism. We don't have like a way to it's not like there's people being oppressed here, but for example, people will make comments about the color of your skin. Like there's places that I just wouldn't dare to go to because I don't want to hear anything about my braids, or restaurants where people have been like told that they can't go in because it's full, but it's not really full. So to me, there's a lot of stuff that society wise is wrong, but people are so used to it that they won't even fight to change it. They see it like, oh, that's just the way that things are here. And to me, I just hate being the person bringing up these conversations every single time. Like when I was organizing my trip, my mom was like, don't tell your great aunt that you're going to Peru by yourself. And I was like, I'm almost 40. Why does it matter? No, she's gonna say things. So, and it's like, it's crazy because I've lived by myself since I was 21. Nobody has given me money. So it's like, why do I owe it to everybody else to not let them know what happens with my life? And it's part of the conversations. Like just 6 months ago, an influencer made a comment about how expensive it is to live by yourself in DR. For example, a rent here is probably from $250 to $500 to $1,000, depending on the neighborhood. But $1,000 for somebody that lives by themselves is very expensive because the minimum wage is $250, 250, 300. So
Per month.
when
Per
you,
month.
yes, so when you hear like somebody works in the hotel industry, or right, so many hotels are opening in DR and the industry is growing, the industry is not growing. The people that are investing in the hotels are growing, but the waiters and waitresses that work in these hotels are making 20,000 Dominican pesos, which is around like maybe $300, which is just not enough money for somebody to make a living or even have a personality, have hobbies. So you will see people being more focused on gossip and glamorizing sacrifice and glamorizing overworking themselves than, you know, getting to know themselves because they don't have the same opportunity or the same privilege that some of us have.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's fascinating to me, and I want to sort of take a step back and realize, on this call we have South America and Colombia, Central America in the DR, the Middle East and Lebanon, a sprawl of European countries, and also the U.S. and some African heritage represented on this call. So I wonder if anyone besides me, because I know I did, is relating to or hearing a lot of their same kind of cultural and traditional background. What Inley was saying.
Yeah, every little thing you said, I totally relate. Yeah, like with traditional parents or just generally the culture of someone living on their own. Like in Lebanon, it's the same way. Like culturally or religiously, it's like frowned upon to be living on your own, especially as a woman. There's definitely a double standard between men and women when it comes to that. And yeah, and also like for me, what I've been struggling with is leaving, like because also Lebanon, like our passport is probably like the weakest passport. We can barely go to a few places without a visa. It's hard to get visas. I'm lucky enough to have been like born in the States, so it's easier for me to travel. But there's always this guilt of, especially recently with the war and
Yes.
with the economic crisis, it's like this guilt of like I was just privileged enough to be able to leave and have a decent life, like at least a safe life. And then people, like a lot of people can't leave. They don't have a choice, or sometimes they can't like imagine a different life because of like their nationalism, or like they feel like it's a cause for them to stay, which is also great, like if you really believe in that and you want to stay for it. But there's always this guilt of I guess it's in a way survival's guilt now with the war and everything, and just having the ability to travel and uh, have a safe life. It's like these small things that we really take for granted, and
Yeah.
people are fighting for it. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Cara, Justin, could y'all speak to that from your perspectives? I think, and Cara, from your students. I mean, we are all of age and working adults. We are more out of touch than you are with the way that young people and children these days are sort of evaluating this reality. So, would be really interested to hear y'all's perspectives.
As the kid would say, no cap. That's true. You gotta keep up with the lingo. Well, I guess first off, just coming from like a German background, so both my parents born and raised. I just got U.S. citizenship a couple of years ago, and Germany's
awesome.
kind of the complete
Congrats.
opposite. Thanks. But Germany's kind of the complete opposite in the sense of national pride is not something we have in a very different way, obviously, with the history of the wars and the Holocaust. Like, I remember moving to the US, it's very weird that people like put flags out everywhere. Like, World Cup comes out, we put our flags out, and then like the second it's over, it's like hide those away, take that away. So like that national pride just looks very different. And I think there's a lot of pride around how we've evolved over time and like how we have handled that history. But national pride is not a thing. However, independence is a big thing. So like I remember kind of growing up in the US, my mom almost joked about how US isn't like teaching kids how to be independent. She's like, here's your bike, I'm not driving you anywhere, like go learn to be on your own. And so yeah, it was just an interesting contrast, but also about the like survivor guilt or like the privilege. I feel like I grew up with so much privilege, and now working in a school where we have about 200 students who are new to the US, from places like Afghanistan or Somalia, like anywhere, like kids that only knew camps growing up. Like we have a wide range of students, and then just students who also have grown up in Aurora, which has its own history. Yeah, there's definitely just that contrast of worldly bubble, but privileged worldly bubble. I grew up in compared to, like, in a lot of ways, the word expat versus the word immigrant, like it's the same thing, but for some reason, like viewed very differently.
Yes,
comes with very
yes,
different
extremely.
lifestyles.
That's a really good point.
So I think just a lot of guilt there and reflection of, I don't know what that all means.
I do have a question. When I was younger, I taught kids like in 5th grade, and it was so difficult for me because of the way that they grew up and everything that was happening in their lives. Like I was hired to teach English, and then came up and threw like language arts, this, that, and I was like, oh wait, how is it for you as a teacher? How do you cope with helping all of these students at the same time from these different backgrounds? Because I only had Dominicans and I was losing my mind. So what about you? Like with all of their cultures and the situations, like how do you deal with that?
I mean, I think it's part of what I love about my job, because I get to learn as much from them as they do from me. So I think just finding ways to like integrate those experiences and those stories into classrooms are really unique. But I think in terms of creating like an environment that feels safe, like, I don't know, I love trying to learn from them. And so I'm trying to learn Spanish and will gladly butcher it. And just like trying to like also learn about them. I think that helps a lot. And then the other thing that's so interesting is the kids, we call them newcomers. So the kids that are very new to the US, they just have this curiosity about them that I feel like a lot of the American school system has killed. And so it's like really, it's a very amazing, unique experience to get to work with children that really are excited about it and have these language barriers and have these extra like struggles to work through. But yeah, it's definitely very inspiring.
I would love to hear an example of that sentiment of what you think the American school system maybe has fallen short on. I mean, there's probably many, but where, like, what comes to mind if you really contrast a newcomer with a child born and raised here in the US and the way that they like think about problems differently or ask questions differently, or what is like the number one thing that kind of springs to your mind?
I think just the priority of schools here. I'm not saying this doesn't happen in other countries, but we don't encourage critical thinking. If anything, we kind of kill it. And so just the way our school systems, I think, are designed, and the way teachers have had teachers themselves and have like learned to teach over it's
it's more about learning to play school rather than learning to think in a lot of ways. And it's a lot of times the teachers like conveying the message rather than the students doing the thinking, and the teachers being kind of guides in that learning process.
Yeah.
And so I don't think that it's not that the kids don't have that, but they've learned that school isn't going to provide that to them. Whereas like a lot of those newcomers maybe haven't had even the experience of getting to learn. And like children are so naturally curious. And I think everyone is, but we kill that piece a little bit, or we don't foster it in a way that continues to promote it. And so there's just this like this hunger for it in some of the kids that haven't gotten to even go to school.
Sure. Yeah, I want to make a really interesting kind of connection here, because what you're saying about playing school rather than actually doing the critical thinking, the adaptive, reactive problem solving, which I'm interpreting in what you're saying, that screams to me the ways that in my time working around basketball teams, I worked for 3 different NBA teams for 7 seasons. I was consistently frustrated by learning techniques and coaching techniques that exist in the way that professional basketball players, the best athletes in the world, are learning and being taught. And what I mean by that specifically is in practice, whether it's just a coach and a player, or it's all 15 players on the team doing a specific drill or activity, lots of things, almost everything is scripted and the outcomes are predetermined. It's really just whether or not the shot at the end of the drill went in, at the end of the play went in, as opposed to creating practices and creating training and creating learning that forces players, and in your case students, to actually adapt to their environments and to be put in situations that challenge them and that make them make decisions in the moment. I was always so frustrated by like, why are we even doing this? He's doing the same thing over and over and over and over and over again. And the only thing that it's doing is repetition of a situation that doesn't actually apply to in-game situations. And I'm seeing and like making the connection to, this is something that I'm learning to do in school, but it doesn't actually apply to real life problem solving or real life decision making. And that is, to me, my professional experience or similar message, or kind of what I'm hearing in what you're saying. Would love to hear if anyone has any similar thoughts or experiences, kind of relationships to that idea.
I actually do. I teach English as an extra, and yesterday we had that lesson. It's called Problems with the Education System. And I was showing my students a video that explained that the current education system was created during the Industrial Revolution, and that it was actually designed to produce more factory workers. That's the reason why our current education system is based on rote learning, which is like repetition and training people and having people follow rules. And like that, the current education system needs like an update, because we can't keep grading people or like measuring their performance as if they all had, the same learning style, which is true. And in contrast to that, I was showing my students another video of a school that we have here in DR, which is like the only school that we have like that. And it's a school like at the beach, and the kids come out to nature and they're like in little huts. And one of the things that the director said at the school is that one of the things that they try to get the kids to do is what Cara mentioned: be curious and stay curious. They learn the things they want to learn in class, like yes, they have to take biology and math and all that, but for example, if a 10-year-old knows how to read to the level of a 14-year-old and he's like in a reading class with a 14-year-old, they don't take the kid out of that class. Because if he has the capacity to be in that class, they let him be there. I think it's amazing when you actually see a school that tries to teach the children according to their capabilities and not to what the system requires. But it does brings a question. What do you do with the kid that went to this school and learned this way and he has to face real life and how the system really is? Like, it's just that school that is that way. What about everybody else that learned with the old system, you know? So it's nice, but it's not real in a way.
I want to challenge that though, that it's not real, because I think it's actually the realest thing. Because if you're just teaching how to problem solve and how to assess the world, like that is what we need, and that will apply in every situation.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't think, I think even then you're able to adapt and see what's going on in the situation. So that was one thought. But I also, something I was thinking about is that often a lot of the kids that we lose, or the troublemakers, or whatever you want to say, are the kids that are actually really, really capable and really smart, and that we lose because they're not being challenged. So I was curious, Justin, if that's something you see. I'm not sure what exactly you do in law, but with your clients, and I don't know, I'm just thinking about the school to prison pipeline, and it's often, I feel like, the ones that had maybe the biggest foot up to start with that we actually lose. So I'd be curious on your observations there.
Yeah, interesting thought. I haven't thought about the sort of folks who start ahead or have the resources kind of being left behind. I do think, I grew up hearing from my family that school really teaches you more than anything how to be an employee, not how to be an employer. And maybe some schools teach people how to have that leadership oriented mindset. But for the most part, most of our schools, are underfunded, teachers are underpaid. And in a lot of ways, some of these schools are dealing with problems that schools aren't equipped to solve, whether it be children who come to school hungry, or gun violence, or households that aren't really supportive, or inspiring in a child's life, or even the environment that people come from. So I don't know. I think education policy is one of the areas where I feel in some ways the solution seems so clear: invest more. But in a lot of ways, feel like it has to be so much more. It touches on culture and so many other policy areas that schools have nothing, no mechanism for influencing, that make education super hard. And then also, it's even if you make a change in our education system, it takes years to really see if it's been successful. So I don't know. I in my organizing work before law school, I was doing mainly environmental work, but education policy was always the area that I felt most challenged by, because I think it's more than just a resource question. It's how do we support teachers? How do we support kids once they leave school? What style of teaching do they have? It's just so much more complex, I think, than get schools more resources, which is important, but not the full equation.
Yeah, that's super, super interesting. I want to ask Hanaa, especially with the way that you have bridged the education with your interest in art, and also you mentioned your interest in climbing. I'd just be fascinated to hear, maybe drawing from the conversation we just had about education and it being narrow, how that has, contrasted with you becoming extremely well-rounded.
Thank you for saying that. I don't know if I'm well-rounded, but it's interesting. Yeah, I feel like when I moved to the US, I was trying to, in a way, shed my identity that I had in Lebanon, because I'm in a new place. Things are very different. I relate to different, like, I'm in a place where I relate to different things, and it's kind of like adjusting to new things and new people, and finding yourself again in a different context. And I think that's where I really started to focus more on like movement and being outdoors, because it's a lot of it is like a community building thing, and that really matters a lot. Like that's something that I realized moving here that I just needed, because I, you know, when I was in Lebanon, I knew like my friends, my circles, my family. I was always surrounded, so I never knew how important it was until I moved here and I was alone. So it was a big thing for me. And when I was in Lebanon, like because I was living with my parents, and it was easier to kind of be free with my decisions when it comes to my career or like anything with an income. I didn't really want to work in a 9 to 5. I didn't want to have like a stable job. But when I moved here, I wanted to give it a chance, because I wanted to be like completely financially independent and just really like give this field a chance. And that's how I started with landscape architecture. But sometimes it still feels very like limiting in a way, or especially in design, sometimes there is a lot of repetition. There is a lot of boxes that if we don't follow, the business would, you know, run out of money. So there's always limitations, and that's why I still like to kind of express with art, or just something where there's more like fluidity. It's more flexible, more expressive. And that's where I still would like to find like to bridge both of these things and find this more like flexible thing, you know, like instead of just having a 9 to 5 and then, oh, when I have time, I'll do some art. Just trying to like bridge both of them together. And that's been hard with, you know, all the life things that happen.
Sure.
In my school in Lebanon, like it was a very like typical school. So I barely had any like activities or any like building on skills other than just taking math and English, and, you know, so, and I can see the difference now, like with looking at other people, whether from Lebanon or in the US or anywhere. I can see the difference as adults, how it really affects you. Like the skills you would build, even in sports. Like I didn't grow up playing sports. It's not as common in Lebanon, I feel, especially if you're not like from a rich family. So it was interesting to get into that as an adult, like in my late 20s. So
That's fascinating. That sports in a lot of other countries is something that is kind of reserved for more privileged folks. I think in the U.S. it really is seen, maybe not seen, but it is effectively used as an economic mobility tool for in a lot of communities. Like sports is your way of getting a scholarship to go to school, and then using, you know, the time that you're essentially working to play sports for an undergrad school gets you a free education or a reduced cost education, which is just find that difference fascinating. That like in a lot of other countries, sports is a luxury, and like yes, you can pay for sports and you can do sports after your schoolwork and whatnot, but it's not like the way that people access high quality, good education systems. Which is interesting. I think that there needs to be a balance between, like, I think sports does teach people. Sports, you know, taught me and it taught a lot of my friends valuable skills. But yeah, in a lot of ways, it's unfortunate that that is the only way that that a lot of kids actually have a chance of improving their, you know, their access to higher education, or in some cases, even, you know, before higher ed.
I'm sorry, I just find it fascinating, like the whole obsession in school in the United States. Like we watch TV here and we watch all of the TV shows, and everybody's like so obsessed with their teams and their mascots and the cheerleaders and this and that. We're like, we have like one basketball team in oh yeah, I mean they play soccer and basketball, and now it's like a bigger deal, but we're not like you guys are at all.
Yeah, that's really, really interesting. Is there, I think Justin, myself, and Cara, if I'm not mistaken, we all spent most of our schooling in the U.S. The question I have is based on Justin's point, which I think is fascinating. Like, I'm wondering what the community norms are for like grade school students, anywhere from 7 to 17. I think extracurricular activities, if you will, in the US do often revolve around sports. And sure, they can be theater and music and other kind of opportunities outside of the actual coursework to learn teamwork and leadership and discipline and artistic expression and in this case physical expression. But like, what do you think makes up for that in, let's say, Lebanon or in the Dominican Republic? Like, that time that isn't spent being able to play sports, if you are a lower class or middle class grade school child or student, are you expected to be working with your family? Are you expected to be just studying that much harder? Are there other sort of activities that maybe we're not aware of or that we haven't talked about yet on this call? Like, what is it that children fill their time with?
Well, I was actually wondering if it almost ties back to the original point of like the collective versus the individual culture.
Yes.
Like
Yes.
in the US, right? It's teaching you to find your individuality by finding your sport, by finding your art, by finding that outside of thing, and that's so valued here. Whereas I would argue that's not as valued.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Hannah, what is it for you guys? Because for us, it's chores and English class.
I think, yeah, it's mostly like, well, most of the time, a lot of like lower class or middle class schools don't have activities like lined up or things. Like we had sports class, we played basketball, but it wasn't really like, I didn't really care much for it. Like you could choose not to play and it's fine. There's not like leagues or tournaments. I mean, of course, some schools do have that, but I feel like the typical schools don't. But yeah, I think it's mostly like community stuff or collective. And I'm trying to think of my own childhood. Like growing up, it was because we learned English in school. Like our classes were in English or French, so we didn't really have to take English like after school. But we would just spend it with family, I guess, and play with the kids downstairs. Like,
Oh, you had that.
yeah,
I mean, we have that too. But for example, okay, in the R, because we are an island and tourism is such a big thing, there's also something called free zones. I don't know if you guys have that. So it's like a industrial area in the DR, in a lot of cities where American companies can come and put their operations there and not pay taxes. So they bring jobs to people in the DR. Basically, everybody in my generation, every millennial was a call center specialist because we did customer service for the States. So, of course, learning English at 13 is always a good thing. But also, we had a very big migration of Dominicans during the 60s and the 70s. So, there's like songs that say everybody has a cousin in New York. So everybody has a cousin in New York, and of course you want to talk to your cousins or eventually move out to the States. But chores is a big thing in DR and a big extracurricular activity, learning English. And we also have schools, it's called Escuela de Bellas Artes, like beautiful like arts.
Yeah, like
And
fine arts, I guess.
fine arts, yeah. And it's part of the government, but it doesn't really work in all of the provinces, unfortunately. We're divided by provinces. In my province, mine did work, and for like a very small fee, you could like enroll your kids in piano classes, flute, ballet, paint classes, but this is not something that was like, it's not popular in all of the cities. So some cities do have it if they're smaller, if it's close to people. That's also something that we have. Like, for example, our public transportation doesn't work as yours. So it's difficult for people to get to school.
Yeah. I mean,
And
public
like,
transportation is not a strength of the United States, at least relative to East Asia and Europe, in my opinion. But that's a very fascinating point, that like it's not even possible to get to school easily. Like I was fortunate. I went to a public school district growing up, but we did have at least school buses that served the entire, region that the school covered. So if you couldn't get private transportation, you at least had that. But it's really humbling to recognize that even that is something that I probably took for granted in high school.
We don't have that. Like only private schools have it here.
Yeah, if you're over a mile away, you are guaranteed transportation.
Oh wow, no, we
And then
don't know.
You would have to take public transportation instead of having the school.
Yes, and it's actually dangerous because, for example, our public transportation doesn't really have like a. I wish I could like upload pictures to be like what. So the thing is that public transportation here is like a mafia in a way. There's like these cars that are from the year 2 of the creation of the earth, and they sound like they are breaking down as they're driving in them. So 2 people sit in the front seat and 4 people sit in the back. It doesn't matter how much you weigh or how thick you are or how tall you are, you gotta fit. And then, for example, this is public transportation. Some parents don't have the money to give their children like their lunch money or the transportation money. Some kids will go to school hungry, and I don't think all schools like have breakfast. Some of them do. But for example, just months ago, 6 months ago, when the school year started, we had kids in a district do a strike. The kids were doing a strike because they didn't have teachers assigned to their school. We're talking about freshmen
Wow.
and 8th graders doing a strike so that they could be on TV complaining that they didn't have teachers. That's one problem. And kids have to depend on that. You see, it's sad. And also like maybe their parents didn't have the best education and the kids maybe want to do better, but the parents could be, I don't know, have a drinking problem or not have a good job, maybe a salary that doesn't pay them enough. People don't really know their rights here. They're not like in the States that they just organize for anything. And it's just hard. Like there's not complete access to a lot of things, and everybody's like used to a mediocre service. So they don't really fight for it. They're like, oh, that's just the way things are. Public transportation in DR is called Concho, and in Haiti it's called Tap Tap, and I think it's like Tuk Tuk in Peru, something like that. Does it have like a funny name in Lebanon?
We do say service, even though
Okay.
it's like service, which is a taxi, pretty much a cab, and it's pretty common. Like you find it everywhere. It used to be cheap. I used it all the time. I think like within the city, this is the most common way to move around. But with schools, there's buses. I think it's like there are a lot of affordable private schools, and they probably most of them have buses available.
Okay.
Otherwise, we don't have trains. Like we don't have much of public transportation.
We have a metro here. Do you guys have like a metro in
We just have a
Lebanon?
train that goes from south to north back in the 70s, and then shit hit the fan, and we don't have that shit anymore.
If it makes you feel better, Bogota, the capital city of Colombia, has never had a metro, even though I think the population of the entire metro area is above 10 million now. So,
Oh,
yeah.
but
Wow.
if it helps you, I've never gotten in DR's metro, but I did get in Medellin's. And why? Because we have this very bad reputation within ourselves to always say, like, claro, of course. It always breaks down. Everything here breaks down. So, for example, the metro once broke down while people were in it. And then also the cable cars. Yeah, I've never used it here in DR. And the one in Puerto Plata, that is a touristic one that takes you like to a little Cristo Redentor big monument thing, it stopped. And I said, you see, that's the thing. They don't give maintenance to things here. So I would never be caught dead in one of those things.
Yeah, no, that's fascinating. And to highlight what you said about Medellin. I could not speak highly enough of at least my experiences with Medellin's public transit.
It's amazing.
Relative to Bogota's, to be sure, and honestly relative to a lot of like Central and South America that I've been able to travel to. But honestly, I mean, this conversation has been tremendous for learning about things that, especially I think in the U.S., we maybe have taken for granted, or the conversation that we had about sports and extracurriculars and how that ties back to individualism versus collectivism, contrasting with the cultures that we on this call represent. I think it's been amazing. I want to kind of wrap up the conversation sort of with an open-ended prompt to think creatively, like based on sort of your understanding of your home culture, your backgrounds, your experiences, and the things that we've talked about today. Do you think there'd be anything top of mind that you would have wanted to experience, or hope that the next person that grows up in your shoes experiences a little bit differently? Like, I definitely relate to people in Colombia being hyper focused about, similar to what Inley was saying, what life is like outside of Colombia, and wanting to know what life is like in the US, and wanting to envision life in the States, life in Europe, life outside, but sometimes not recognizing the beauty that, from my perspective, growing up in the US and not having enough of a collectivist community, at least in my opinion, I would have loved to have had a little bit more of that infrastructure. So, do any of those things sort of resonate with you all, or come to mind slightly different examples? I think we can kind of end the call with any takes on that.
I was going to say, I feel like I didn't two things. I think I didn't really get exposed to global cultures outside of the U.S. until college. And so I think just exposure to different ways of thinking, different cultures, different history would have been helpful, even in reaffirming what I think makes our country great. I think it would have been nice to be better exposed to that earlier on. I think art is something that I feel like I'm more curious about and interested in exploring and going to museums and experiencing, but I don't think it was viewed in our education system, or growing up, for me at least, as as a a interest or hobby. Maybe music, because there's like band, but for the most part, I don't think I thought of art as an area of interest that could be explored outside of like wanting to be an artist. But I think appreciating culture and art and cuisine and that sort of thing is not something that I really was focused on or interested in until probably college and after.
I think, yeah, in Lebanon, I feel like what I noticed moving here is we grow up with a lot of exposure to art, and maybe because like the collective in general needed a form of expression because of so many like dramatic things happening in the country, I guess. But moving here, I felt like it's just not a common way of expression. I think people go to different things, like they find refuge in different things, but there's not as much of an art scene as compared to what I noticed in Lebanon, which was interesting. Like, I think if we did activities like after school, it was mostly maybe art related or music related. But yeah, that was maybe like more common in sports.
That's fascinating. I think that's a fantastic way to end our first ever Uncommon Pod. So thank you so much for being a part of it. And we are really, really excited to continue the People journey.